don't negotiate on email, because it is a really easy place for people to become transactional, because people get brave on emails, they get tough on emails, and they can be more direct on emails. Don't do it. If you want to create value,
welcome to the Redefining Sales podcast. I'm your host, Abby White. Today, I have got with me the incredible Glin Bayley. And as you can see, she is the author of the latest book, The Negotiation Playbook. So in this conversation, we are going to be talking about all things negotiation. Now, before you think this episode is just for salespeople, we also talk about negotiation in terms of our daily life. If that's going into a shop and asking for a better price, or asking for money off your bill, or even in my context, we talk about negotiating with my child, which probably is the hardest negotiation that I ever have to contend with. So we talk about actually how it can help us, whether it's asking for the pay rise that we deserve or asking just for a better deal. And what Glin focuses on is actually the value creation and creating value for both sides. So Glin walks us through some really, really highly practical steps that you can take and apply to your negotiation and really develop that skill set, and actually talks us through why actually having that negotiation skill set in our kit bag is actually so valuable to all areas of our life. We talk about the differences between how men and women negotiate. We talk about AI for negotiation. We talk about the first steps, and we talk about following a value-based methodology, which is what Glin really focuses on. So a little bit of further background about Glin before we dive into this conversation. She's known as the Value Negotiator, and she is also a non-exec board director, self-leadership coach, author, and speaker on a mission to help the world create more value agreements. She has trained executives from companies like Unilever, Arnott, Lendlease, Woolworths, and the list goes on of corporates that she has worked with. And her unique approach to negotiation is really around a powerful belief that it's not what you do, but who you become in the process that really unlocks your success. And we talk about quite a bit of that during this conversation. So I hope you enjoy this, and make sure you've got your pad and pen at the ready, because there are a lot of highly practical tips coming your way. Welcome to the Redefining Sales podcast. Today we have got Glin with us, who I am so excited to talk to and dive into the world of negotiation. Welcome, Glin.
Thank you so much, Abby. I'm very excited too. Our topics are so interrelated, so I really am excited to see where this conversation goes.
I think you're winning a prize already of the most questions that I want to ask. I had like over an entire A4 page worth of questions that I want to dive into. So a lot of ground to cover.
Brilliant. Let's go.
So I want to kind of start with setting the foundations and the basics, because I don't know if you find this, so fill me in if you get something different. But I find that negotiation sometimes is potentially misunderstood, or people have a different understanding of what it is. And I think some people almost confuse it with thinking more about manipulation and some almost negative connotations with it. So if you had to set the foundations and explain negotiation to my 5-year-old, how would you explain it?
To anyone that is unclear about what negotiation is, it is a conversation to reach an agreement. That's it. Super simple. And how many conversations do we have every day in which we are trying to reach an agreement? Many. With your 5-year-old, or your now 6-year-old, actually. You're having conversations. You're having conversations with your colleagues around work projects. You're having conversations with suppliers and clients around agreements you're making around product and service delivery. So we're having conversations every single day. The key distinction between what is a regular conversation and what is a negotiation is the intention within that conversation. So if you go into a conversation blind, not planned, not considered, sure, you're in a dialogue. But in a negotiation, when you're being clear about there's a strategic agreement to be made, then you are being intentional around how you plan for that conversation, how you execute that conversation, and how you close that conversation. So for me, negotiation is very much a daily skill. It's a skill that can enrich what people can create in terms of value for themselves and their businesses. And unless you're skilled in the art of conversations to reach agreements, you're going to be at a disadvantage, both professionally and personally.
So on that note, if people are suddenly like, oh, I don't need to listen to this episode because I'm not in sales or I'm not in procurement, you've just said there, you're going to be at a disadvantage actually if you haven't developed the skill. Who do you think needs to develop this skill? Is it everybody, or is it just typically you're in a sales role, it's for you?
No, it's everybody. My background was a management accountant. I was formally trained in negotiation skills 6 years out of uni, and I still feel like 6 years out of uni was too late. It probably should have started at school. And the reason why I say that is because with negotiation, it develops your emotional intelligence. It allows you to understand yourself better. It allows you to learn how to regulate your emotions in difficult conflict situations. It improves your influencing skills, so you can get people to agree to your ideas or your visions that you want to create for the businesses that you work for, or your personal agendas. And you can move people towards that vision with effective negotiation skills. And that's not manipulation, that's just learning how to understand people better, understanding how you behave under pressure, understanding how other people behave under pressure, and then how do you take yourselves out of the pressure-fueled environments into actually powerful strategic agreements that create lots of value for the parties that are involved in the process. And that value could be monetary, it could be intangible value, but there is so much opportunity with negotiation that if you tell me you're not in a sales role, I would say you absolutely are in a sales role, and you absolutely need the skill of negotiation to support your ability to sell.
I love that. I actually think I've learned the most about negotiation being a parent. I swear to God, I negotiate 10 times more, and I have to deal with the emotional regulation you just talked about 10 times more negotiating with my son than I ever do at work. I feel like it ups the ante on your negotiation skills.
It really does. And as your son grows, you're going to be navigating different approaches to negotiation when his teenage years or when he's ready to leave home. So your skills in negotiation absolutely are being tested as parents, but understanding how to create value for both parties, get your son to go to bed when you want him to go to bed or eat his greens. There is so much opportunity at home and at work.
So you've mentioned there create value for both parties, and several times actually already in the conversation you've said make sure there's lots of value, and that might not just be monetary, it might be intangible. You've sort of mentioned it several times, and I know that sort of that value method is a lot of what you base your work on. Your book, the Negotiation Playbook, is very much around the value method. So I want to sort of hit that early on. Can you talk to us a little bit about the value method?
Yeah, so let me first explain what value is so that everyone's on the same page. Now we have price, what you pay for something, you have the cost that's involved in the project, and then you have value, the outcome, the usefulness or the benefit of the work that you're doing or the product that you're buying. Now, most people often in negotiation get caught up with how much am I paying for something, i.e. what's the price I'm going to pay, or how much is this project going to cost me? But we're not focused enough on what's the value that's going to be gained from this interaction with the other party, whether that be a client or a supplier for a product or service. Now, value is around what each party perceives to be of benefit to them and useful to them, right? And there's two types of value. If I was to break it down, is to the extrinsic value that we might see in a marketplace. Often that value can be determined by supply and demand, looking at what your competitors are doing, how are you comparing in the marketplace for your products and services, and therefore the value your consumers are going to get from your product is being calibrated based on what else is in the marketplace. So the price you get to command for that value is influenced by supply and demand parameters. But on the inside, as a human negotiating a deal, we have our intrinsic value. And when we're negotiating a deal, and I've seen this happen too many times, is we can often get caught in a feeling that someone is challenging our personal value. And we confuse our intrinsic value, or another word for that might be worth, like what am I worth and what's my contribution here, and think someone's not valuing that. And it can keep us in our ego when we're in those environments. And the knock-on consequence of that is, if we're in our ego, we can't effectively think about where value in a deal lies, because we're now focused on self-preservation, self-interest, looking good, and that takes away from the value that could be discovered in the deal. So that's, I want to put a bow around what value meant. So this is not about your internal worth, because as at a human level, we're all worthy and we're all the same. But in an extrinsic environment, our value can go up and down, either as an individual in a job looking to get paid a certain salary, or as a product or service provider in the marketplace looking to get an exchange of value in return for our product or service.
Yeah, I love that positioning, actually. It's a really good way to frame it.
Yeah. And then do you want me to just explain the value framework? So what I then do is to say, we want to negotiate for value. So how do we do that? So I've got an acronym that's based on the value word. And the first one is, first, let's identify your value and their value. So let's identify the value that's available in the deal. And that really begins with understanding, what is your negotiation counterparty actually interested in? So say you are an IT company selling software as a solution to a client. You need to understand what your client values. Now, you might focus on the price and you might focus on the cost, but what's the benefit of your software solution? And what will it enable them to do, and where will it enable them to create value in their business, either with their people's efficiency, time, productivity, or output in their business. So let's understand what they value, and then let's understand what you value, because if you can understand where value lies, then when it comes to exchanging it, we can do that a lot more powerfully. The second step in the A is analyze the data. Now, data, I don't know about for you, but for me, it often conjures up data. It sounds so dull and analytical and boring. And I'm an accountant by background. But data for me now, it's like being a detective. It comes from two sources. Two sources of data is published data, anything that's written, reports, available market data. It could be internal in the organization data captured. It could be external. So that's one source. The other source is people data. And this is the most under-leveraged source of data, because people give us a lot of information, and yet we don't seem to record that anywhere. And I've listened to one of your previous podcasts where you talked about, with Regan, about the CRM and capturing data in a sales process. However, most people don't capture what the behavior of the other party was when they were having the sales conversations or the dialogue. And that's lost data, because you don't actually know now what type of person that other counterparty is. You might potentially have captured their interests outside of work to give you an insight into who they are, but probably not. You probably haven't captured data around their tells and who they are when they're in their ego. So how's their stress response? And so there's so much data you can capture in your CRM systems about who the person's being, but we don't, right? So people data is massively underutilized. The third step in the framework is the L in the value acronym, and it's understand your leverage. What levers are in the deal? What are you seeking to exchange? Where do you have leverage? And that could be the amount of time if you're the buyer and you're shopping for a solution and time's on your side, that's a lever that gives you power, because the more time you have, the more opportunity you've got to find a supplier that suits your needs. But if you're the person that has less time, then you've got less leverage because you need a solution faster that might need you to make decisions quicker, and you're suggesting that you're more in need of this solution now, so urgency becomes a factor. So there's lots of different things around leverage we can consider, which is how many variables have you got in the deal. Too often large corporates package things into less levers. So we have price, we might have volume, we might have contract term, we might have payment terms, but there's not a massive list because we, as humans, want to make deals simple as possible. So we tend to lump things together because having so many variables to go through creates complexity. But actually, the more levers you have, the more opportunity you have to exchange value, because you're creating options for value to be created that are outside of price, which is where most people default to. So we want to take that price equation off the focus area, because it only leads to a win-lose or a value distribution negotiation. So that's leverage. And then the fourth step is all about embracing feeling uncomfortable. And this is probably what you get in sales. Most people go, oh, I'm not a salesperson, so I don't want to do the sales, or we've got that ick vibe that's still left over from, car salesman approaches. But in negotiation, and it's similar to sales, unless you're willing to make the ask and ask for more than you think the other party has the capacity to give you, you are going to have to embrace feeling uncomfortable. Because if you don't embrace feeling uncomfortable, you're never going to make the ask for more than what you might need, or for beyond what you think the scope of the current deal is. So if you've got a service provider and all you're talking about is renewing the deal, and if you're not exploring that there might be another part of their business that actually needs another solution, you could bring that in together by asking the question around, what are you doing in this area? And is there an opportunity to support you here? And if we combine the two, create more levers, we can trade more, exchange more value more effectively. And people don't do that. And it's because it's a fear of devaluing themselves. Now, as humans, we all want to be valued. So we often don't want to diminish our value, which is why we hold ourselves back from making the ask, having uncomfortable conversations, doing more than we need to do. We do what we need to keep us to the edge of our comfort zone, but perhaps not outside of it. So we want to get outside of our comfort zone. And then the final step is execute the plan. The premise is, please have a plan, because if you're going into a conversation where you're looking to agree a deal and you don't have a plan, you're underprepared, you are going to diminish the amount of value you can create in the deal, or at least claim in a deal if it's not a creative environment. And also you'll leave money on the table, because the other party, if they are taking the deal seriously, and often these are multi-million-dollar deals, if they're taking it serious, they'll have a plan, and they'll have set the stage. They'll have identified the deal that they want to have designed, and they'll have positioned, primed, and given lots of information to set the table in advance, so that when you get to the table, you might think something's your idea, but actually you've been primed into what their idea is. And it's all because they were very clear on the deal they wanted, they designed it, they set the table, and then they're in the process of executing it. And most organizations, I hear, say, when they make a proposal to the other party, let's see what they come back with. And when I hear that, it tells me you are not prepared, you don't have a plan, you haven't considered what the response might be and considered your counter response back. And most parties are winging it. And there's so much value left on the table because of that case. And deals fall over even when they're agreed, because they don't think about the plan
Mm.
the deal's been constructed too. So I'm going to take a breath because I'm like, oh, there's so much.
No, I now have a whole new page full of questions, so thanks for that. I think that's so interesting. So many parts of that. The first is I'm going to say the word intention. I think that how you're sort of talking about going about it so intentionally. We can't just turn up and wing it, as you said. There's that level of planning, thinking, consideration, and also that what do you want out of it? Like I've heard so many people go, oh, actually that ended up not being very profitable, or that ended up not being a good deal because it kind of just happened and fell that way, like you said, rather than actually that intentional piece. Something for me personally I feel made a difference is when I kind of knew what was my walk away point. Like at what point did I know actually I'm okay to walk away, because you don't have to say yes, not all business is good business. And at what point am I going to start to resent the deal that I've got myself into because the value exchange, be it monetary or otherwise, I don't feel as even. So I love your first points there around that level of planning, what's the outcome you want, and being so intentional in designing.
Yeah, and what you just said there around knowing when to walk away, that comes to understanding your leverage, right? Because if you've got less options available to you, then your walk away might be much lower than if you had multiple options. But if you don't know what the available options are because you haven't considered the alternatives, or you haven't considered that you actually might have more leverage than the other party, then you're going to leave value on the table. You might accept a deal out of fear of losing something, and we're all designed as humans to avoid loss more than we are designed to seek pleasure. So if we can understand our options, if we can plan for our options, it actually gives you an option to go, well, maybe I've got more leverage than I thought, and therefore I can ask for more because I can logically be aware that the risk is mitigated based on the available options to me.
Yeah, I love that. And I like that you've stressed several times in this conversation, we're not just talking about monetary. Some of the best partnerships I've got the most benefit from are actually mutually beneficial, and actually there's no money changing hands. Yes, we're all, many people listening to this, we're in sales, we've got a target to meet, and so on. So absolutely there's that side of the conversation. But there's also, like you said, deals, opportunities to be had where there's strategic partnerships that can also help benefit growth and sales. And actually you can create that win-win. So not limiting our thinking of negotiation purely to money.
Absolutely. And I know, and I might upset a lot of people when I say this, is that I know a lot of people think that collaboration is idealistic, and people say, oh, I collaborate and I do win-win all the time. From my experience, having trained hundreds of participants, delegates in senior roles in large corporates with multi-millions, sometimes billion-dollar budgets, when people are under pressure, it's easy to move from collaboration straight into competition, because we're often not in our authentic, conscious expression when we're calm. And when there's high stakes and KPIs involved and focus for your business, we can start off collaboratively and end up competitive negotiation techniques really, really easily, even when we think we're being collaborative. And so when I'm talking to people about thinking about win-win and what can you do to create that value exchange, whether it's monetary, whether it's intangible, is to see your counterpart. And you have to, there's a framework that I take people through around understanding, are you first in a competitive environment or a collaborative environment? Because if you're in a competitive environment, then the challenge is you apply a collaborative technique in a competitive environment and you get absolutely obliterated, because you're bringing the relationship to the table, and the other person's only focused on outcome for themselves. So you have to understand what scenario you are in order to discern what the right behavior is. But what I will say is, when you're talking about strategic partnerships, and if you have got strategic partnerships, see your counterpart as a comrade, because how would we treat someone if we didn't see them as competition, or we didn't see them as the other party? Because we don't want to be othering people. We want to create unity around our key strategic suppliers, our key strategic customers. And if we saw them as comrades that were on their own adventure, how could we support the journey we both go on together to be way more fun, way more lucrative, an opportunity for us to grow, which is ultimately what every business is in business for. Nobody's in business to stay static or to decline in value. We want to grow value. We want to grow our profitability, our revenue. So what could you do if you treated your counterpart as a comrade? What would you share? How would you share it? And what might you uncover from the other party as well? Because you're not othering them. You're going, actually, yeah, we're in this together to create this outcome.
I like that. I really, really like that, because I think it creates such a bad taste when, like you said, it starts out, oh, we're all being friendly, and then going, hang on, you just switched here. What just happened? And so, yeah, I think that's really a great point. I want to unpick two other points that or sort of double down on two other points that you made there before we sort of move on. One point you talked about was capturing data and capturing people data in your CRM. I'm really big on this because, for example, if I know, actually a good example, we work with someone who's an extremely high D in the DISC profile and very much in meetings, cut to the chase. What's the punchline? What are the key selling points? You need to go into that meeting bloody prepared, or you're going to wind this person up quite royally. And so my team, we kind of knew and communicated, okay, this person's a really high D. This is how you might want to prepare for that conversation. And we would capture that and in handovers. I'm curious, when you're talking about people data, is that the sort of thing you're talking about, or are you talking about also going beyond it? So, for example, today I've just been proofing one of our podcasts that's coming out this week at the time of recording, which was around like facial interpretation and all that. And then we've had others around micro expression. When you're talking about people data, what are we talking about?
Combination of both. The danger is, I mean, I understand there's so many different profiling tools around there, and it's easy to put someone in a box, right? So with the DISC, yeah, you're going to get the drivers to be pretty direct, straight to the point. And you could probably read that even if you didn't know their DISC profile, right? But the key thing there is, one, yes, do we know enough about them around their style? And you can use, this is an interesting one, Crystal Knows on LinkedIn. Have you used that?
I love it. Yeah, you can do a free trial for a few and then you can pay, but it's not expensive as a LinkedIn.
You can use Crystal Knows to give you some insights around how people are writing their profiles, assuming if they've written them, but also how they are there. What do you know about them through your interactions? Because what's fascinating is who they are. They might be a high D when they're all in the business mode, but who are they being when they're not in business mode? Do you have data around calibrating what takes them from 0 to 100 in that, right? So what are you noticing about them? The other thing, it might be the words they're using. So for example, in negotiation, one of the things I talk about in my book is around not using loose language, right? Loose language leaks value. And if I say to you, hey, Abby, I'm looking for around, and that's me making my proposal, to pay X for your product or service. I've said I'm looking for, which says I'm loose because I'm not fixed on this. I'm still searching. Around about, so it's not a definitive number. And so if I'm hearing those words, am I actually interpreting what they mean? And do we know whether this person is always loose because they're unplanned, or is this person not loose because they are planned? And actually we'll also give you information around whether they're trained in negotiation or not, because I often find those that are trained in negotiation will never give proposals in a way that the way they deliver their proposals will already tell you how movable they are in their position.
I love that. And is that also, because I also feel like that's also the other way around as well, in terms of how you're also, if someone says, we might be able to help with that, or we might be able to save blah, blah, blah. Like, I feel like my IBM training was very, very good at actually having the confidence to say, not overcommitting if you can't guarantee something if you can't, but having confidence in the language of removing the ifs, the maybes, the mights, or should or coulds, those words.
If you're the person that was being given a proposal and it's not something you can do, often though the danger, if we just immediately reject, is that it puts the other party back, and we don't want to have them backing out of a conversation. We want them leaning into a conversation. So we don't want to use any language that rejects the other party, because everyone knows rejection feels yucky, and we don't want to feel yucky, and we don't want to make anyone else feel yucky. So we don't use rejecting language because it can get the other party offside, but that doesn't mean you're going to say yes to everything. What we often can do is put some conditionality around it. So we don't do this in our business at this point in time. However, what we're willing to look at is whether there's possibility to explore this should this, and this condition be met, right? And if you know those conditions for the other party can't be met, then you're not going to have the possibility to look at it. But you've remained open and you've let the other party see that there is still an opportunity to get what they want, but they're going to have to do something in return and exchange value or meet a condition in order to get that. So we can remove rejecting language. We can keep open language when we're on the receiving side, not wanting to reject and not wanting to shut down the conversation. But we can also be a lot firmer with our language when we're making proposals, which is when often a lot of information is leaked in how that proposal is delivered.
So can you, if anyone wants clarification on that, can you give us a couple examples in terms of if there's like a mini like do's and don'ts in terms of language or words in particular to consider to bring that to life?
Yeah. So if I hear I'm looking for possibly around, they're all loose. So anything words that often end in ly, because there's movement around them. So listen for those, but also replace it. So if I was to give an example, I'm looking for something around this price. Like, it already tells you I'm movable, or I have a range between here and here. I've already told you what my range is. But when you're more firm, the price I'm willing to pay is, suddenly, even if I am movable, the other party has to work to move me. I've not indicated I'm movable in my language. What I can accept is this. If you can meet this condition, then I can meet your condition of X. So you can make things conditional, but you're slowing down how you speak, because we're uncomfortable. When we're nervous, we speak faster. So if we slow it down, we can be more conscious and intentional about the language we use, and we can communicate more effectively around what we want without giving away our.
Oh, so good. I'm like loving absolutely all of this. This is
I can't remember what page it is on my book. I do have a list on in my book that tells you words you shouldn't use and words you should, but I'll find the page for you and I'll let you know where it is.
I've got a copy of your book here that you kindly sent to me that is on my next to read list that I'm very excited.
Page 219, closing language. Yeah, closing language leaks.
Here we go. I love it. We're doing it on the fly. Loose language. Ideally, I would like to. A firmer alternative. My requirement is loose language. I'm hoping, aiming for around. A firmer alternative is I'm prepared to commit to. Yeah, it's great.
So rather than I can probably do, I will do. So having, and when you say target, it's saying I'm aiming for something. So it's still loose. So my position is, this is where I'm at. So there's a lot of tightening up of language we can do.
Yeah, I can probably do versus I will do. There's some brilliant examples here. I'm folding down and highlighting that page. The other thing I wanted to circle back on when you were talking about the value method was you also talked about the ask, and you talked about embracing feeling uncomfortable. And I would kind of agree with you on that a lot of the time to your point, and to use your words, values left on the table because we don't even ask. How do you start to overcome that one? Because I think that is a biggie.
Yeah, it's a great question. And the reason why I talk about negotiation, mastering negotiation, isn't just about what you do, it's about who you become. Because if you master negotiation, the person that you will have become on the other side of those skills will not be the person that shies away from having any conversation. So if I share my own experience, I really was uncomfortable with negotiating from a very young age. It just felt ick. It was like, oh, I don't want to be embarrassed, asking for discounts in the shop because my mum didn't speak English. She spoke Punjabi, and growing up in England, she was originally from India. I was her translator. So I would shy away from asking the shops for a discount because I'm like, oh, I don't want to look stupid. I don't want to be rejected. And that's a feeling that we all have as humans. But what I've learned, and I wish I'd learned it a lot earlier, was that had I not mastered those skills and got over my discomfort in my teenage years, I would have created significantly more value for myself. Because what not asking did, it stopped me from asking for pay rises. It stopped me from negotiating my salaries when I was offered new roles, because I assumed the salary that was on offer was the most they can give me, which it rarely ever is. I didn't exchange value for the way I wanted to work or how I wanted to work. So, and now post-COVID, people are wanting more balance in their lives and more opportunities. So I would say, if you want to get over feeling uncomfortable, the first thing is you've got to be willing to practice getting rejected. Making an ask, and start with something small that you don't mind, is low stakes, and allow yourself to feel the discomfort in making that ask and being okay with them saying no. In fact, go for a no, because the objective isn't necessarily to get a yes, it's to get you past the no so that you can consistently keep asking. The second thing I would say is, what I teach in the way you negotiate is you do not have to be someone else. I want you to be authentically you. And if you decide who you want to be as a person, based on your own value set of being a good human, making a meaningful contribution and a difference to the world, you can still be that and be an excellent negotiator. In fact, being the best type of negotiator is the diplomat. And the diplomat is a personality that is highly focused on the relationship and is also highly focused on the result. And I think, to your very beginning comment around the misunderstanding of negotiation, is most people think negotiation is combative, it's manipulative, it's conflict, and I've got to be posturing. And yes, sometimes in certain situations, you do need to know how to protect yourself from being exploited by others. Absolutely. But for the greater opportunity, there is actually more opportunity to collaborate and create value. And negotiation will show you how, because you learn how to read other people. If you learn how to read other people, you are way more aware of yourself. And when you learn how to master yourself, then you can learn how to master a conversation. And what I learned was through reading lots of different books and the differences between how men and women negotiate, and realizing that, and also lived experience with participants in training, was that for a woman, we have to actually be more concerned about being likable than a man does. So if we're assertive and we're strong in our negotiation ask, if we aren't still perceived as likable by the end of that ask, actually it does us more damage. So we have to be likable and tough if we want to get what we want. And I don't mean tough in an aggressive way, but to be able to stand in our own power and get outcomes that we seek. Getting our worth, closing the gender pay gap, negotiating a senior promotion when you've got a population of people that have got more experience, because again, women wait until we've got every box ticked before we apply. And I think negotiation as a skill set, if you master it, actually allows you to be a more confident, more authentic you, which is what we want. We want more strong individuals who can be relational and create value for their organizations.
I love the point that you just made around also starting small and going for the no, and just on something really, really small, and almost like building and flexing and developing that muscle. We were actually talking last week to Holly Ransom, who's a leadership expert, and she was saying that she did a 365-day, year-long with her best mate challenge of embracing getting uncomfortable, which is what you're talking about. And every day you had to do something that was uncomfortable. And it didn't mean like I'm going skydiving every day. She was talking about the fact it might be like, oh, I'm going to ask for, or I'm going to ask that question, or I'm going to have that uncomfortable conversation. But she talked about not going like way full hog out of your comfort zone, but actually starting small and sort of building. And I like that idea that you've sort of suggested as like, how do you kickstart this? How do you start building and actually starting really small with something, aiming for a no, getting used to and getting comfortable with the no's that you hear? Because even, for me, I've been in sales like nearly 20 years. And even sometimes you have those days where you're having a rubbish day and you get the no and you get the rejection and it kind of hits you differently to what it might have done another day. But it's actually, you're more used to it because you're in that situation most days of the week.
And also that separation of value, your intrinsic worth and value is never on the table to be negotiated up or down. The only person that can diminish your intrinsic value is your own sense of self. So when you realize that actually your own intrinsic value is safe, if you allow it to be safe, then the only thing you're focused on is how much extrinsic value can I get in this conversation? And it might be as simple as in your sales environment. And again, it's something I tell my corporate clients is don't negotiate on email, because it is a really easy place for people to become transactional, because people get brave on emails, they get tough on emails, and they can be more direct on emails. Don't do it. If you want to create value and you want to make an ask that you want the other party to accept, it is so much harder for them to reject you when you're on the phone to them. So one uncomfortable step might be, if I'm about to send an email, maybe this time I'll pick up the phone, because use negotiation as a verbal communication, and then use email to confirm what you've agreed on that conversation. Don't use email as the method to do the negotiating, because you create more resistance anyway. We attribute tone to it, we attribute our own meaning to it, and so we can create more friction for ourselves when we avoid our discomfort than if we embrace our discomfort.
That is so interesting. And a conversation I'm having a lot at the moment is actually getting, during COVID, we got into some bad habits. Getting back into pick up the phone, have a face discussion, let's go see them in person. And actually now a lot of stuff is being done on email. So that's interesting that you've talked about when you're negotiating, you can confirm on email, but don't be negotiating by email. That's very interesting.
Yeah. And also, if you think the other party is not going to be leveraging AI now in emails to use negotiator language, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to go on to ChatGPT and say, what would a professional negotiator say in this situation? And in your organization, you may, obviously, I would hope, cybersecurity wise, protecting your organizational IP and knowledge from being put straight into ChatGPT. But if you do have a system that you're allowed to use, there will be people using ChatGPT to say, how do I respond to this in a way that closes any leaks in my language, that keeps the relationship open, but is very clear and assertive about my position. So people will use language through AI to further their position. Whereas if they're unskilled and you're picking up the phone, guess what? You're going to hear their tone, you're going to hear what they really mean, because you've got their words and their tone to work with. And then if you get on a Zoom, you've even got your body language to work with. So you want to give yourself multiple points of validation around someone's intent. And you cannot get that on words alone. The Morabian's research was Albert Morabian. He had identified 7% of the message is confirmed in words alone, 38% through tone, and 55% in body language. So if you're using email, you are only relying on validation of the message's intent based on words alone. It's not enough. It's not enough. You need more data points around people. What are they saying, to be able to understand? But people won't do that because it's uncomfortable. But it's how value's lost. It's so easily distributed on email.
Oh, so good. And you said there the absolute topic of the day that we have to talk about. You talked about AI, and people potentially using ChatGPT or whatever that might be. I think that's a really interesting conversation right now. So how do you think that AI is going to influence negotiation, and where we're going with this?
Yeah, what I heard this quote recently, and I love this, is AI is not going to replace humans. However, humans with AI will replace humans without AI. Okay, so you're going to need to embrace AI in your business. I work with a distribution partner for a negotiation AI, specifically around negotiations. So this is around not just how you evaluate. So you can easily use technology now, basic software that says, tell me the difference between this deal and which one's more valuable, and use more automation. I'm not talking that. I'm talking about 2 ways to negotiate, either using technology to negotiate on your behalf. So if you've got high volume, low transaction value, but you're having to do multiple interactions in person, this AI, generative AI, can do the negotiation for you because it uses language like a human would be. So it understands sentiment, it understands slang, it understands what people mean, it's dynamic, it will work with you, you can share more about the situation, it will ask questions and give you negotiation guidance based on expert insights on negotiation, because it's been fed all of the Harvard Business School education around it, any white papers written on negotiation, various different books on negotiation. So if you want that level of depth of negotiation insight and want someone to do it for you, this software can do that. Or you can use it as a co-pilot. So you can have autopilot or you can have co-pilot. And in the co-pilot, it's like having me in your pocket. So it's a negotiation expert, but you're having a dialogue, but you're the interface between you and your supplier and your client. So I can be, for example, taking your emails that you're sending me, putting it into my system, saying, can you help me understand the sentiment? This is the deal parameters that we wanted. Can you help me create what would be the best next move based on my prioritized parameters and what the value of the deal needs to be? And it will do that for you. It will craft you what your response needs to be, and then you can communicate that on the phone, in person, or on email, which I don't recommend, but people do, so that you can get the deal moving forward. It also helps within tender situations, evaluations of tenders really, really easily, because most people are trying to validate not only financials, but other intangible variables. And to be able to do that across large tenders and communicate with the tender submitters faster, it will do that. Because the biggest challenge around tender environments is people can take 4 months evaluating which tender's the right tender, and you can use AI to do that in a heartbeat. So we've got that software out. We're working with key partners in retailers, in suppliers, and it's, as the technology has evolved, has got more and more sophisticated. So as I say, AI won't replace humans, but it will replace humans without AI.
I think that's so interesting, because it's got to be a competitive advantage. I like your example of co-pilot, where you said it's like having me in your pocket. I totally want you in my pocket. Like, I absolutely want you on my team. And so I think that's really interesting to go, well, hang on, someone with you on their team, so to speak, versus someone without. It's a competitive advantage. And I think that's where there's now this real edge and opportunity to be had, where some I'm seeing a real divide of organizations leaning into AI, but with the obvious security concerns and doing so, carefully and in the right way, versus those that are going, hang on, whoa, either it's overwhelming, it's confusing, or too concerned about security, they're actually not touching it at all. And I think it's going to create that divide.
Absolutely. And what you say about security is critical, right? Because we know cybersecurity is a big threat. But if you don't adopt technology, there's going to be an even bigger threat. And one of the things that we've done with the software that we're developing and in organizations with is it's built with you. So it's not hey, here's the off the shelf. And the reason why it's not off the shelf is because every individual circumstances and the nuances are different, and often off the shelf stuff needs to be customized. But secondly, if you think about ChatGPT, it's only just starting to get information around, well, how did you get to that answer? What was your source? For the most part, it is still a black box. You type in a question, it gives you a response. You've got no idea where it's drawn that data set from. You don't know how accurate it is. And you don't know why it's made the decisions it's made. Now, in a corporate governance environment, when you've got data, cybersecurity aspects, but just from an ethics perspective and a governance perspective, you need to know if an AI is going to be negotiating on your behalf or negotiating with you, and you're making decisions based on that insight. Where did that intelligence come from? And so the software you use actually opens up the back door and says, here's how the decision was made, and these are the parameters used, so that if you're ever audited, here's all of the information to show you how that decision making's come to life. And I think that's what's important. And so if any of your IT clients are considering AI, you really want to know how it does tick the governance boxes, how it does it tick the cybersecurity boxes, but also understand the ethical implications of using technology to help further commercial outcomes.
Yeah, because how you're talking about what you're building is you're removing some of that bias, the hallucinations, and some of those other things, and you're being able to understand, like you said, how that decision is made. So I think that's really, really, really interesting.
Yeah.
We have covered so much ground, and honestly, we're going to have a part 2 of this conversation, because I think that I covered probably about 20% of the wild questions I had on my list. What I would love to end with, though, is just first steps. We've talked about a couple of whether it's embracing just a no, or being uncomfortable in a small way, or picking up the phone rather than an email. If anyone's listening, really inspired to go, okay, cool, I'm going to double down on my negotiation skills. Any other thoughts around first steps someone can take from here? Yes,
my unashamed plug for the negotiation playbook will be one. There we go. There's both of us. Awesome. It's a really easy read. I wrote this book because I don't want people being taken advantage of because they don't know how to protect themselves against manipulation and exploitation. So I say read that, because it's not, as I said, it's not about mastering negotiation. It is, because I give you techniques on how to, but I want you to understand yourself first, and I want you to understand what happens in environments that you might not even be aware of exist. So just read a book. That's not going to change your life, though, because if you want to get results, you have to put things into practice. So the second step would be absolutely start small, and it might be starting with your child, to thinking about, right, how do I get my child to do more of what I want and value, and how can I best exchange what they value? So I would say start where it's low stakes, and always, where possible, make things conditional. Not always, but where possible, make things conditional. So if you want your boy to go to bed sooner, ask him for what you want, whether it's brush your teeth, put your pajamas on, get into bed, then offer the reward. And in exchange, if you do that, then I'll read you a story. But often parents do spend more time thinking about mentioning the reward, story, ice cream, eat your veg, but if we mention the reward first rather than the ask, then what's often left in the memory is the reward. So make sure you attach the right ask for the reward. So start small is ultimately what I'm saying. In podcasts, listen to this podcast. There's lots of other resources and papers, and use ChatGPT. You can create a ChatGPT negotiation co-pilot in the interim, in the absence of a more sophisticated solution, start small and test things in, negotiating your bills, negotiating a salary increase, negotiating with your friends on which restaurant you're going to eat because you've been to their neck of the woods more often than they've come to yours. So see if you can start with the small things.
I love that. And if you can help me negotiate with my son, that's definitely a winner. I've got to say, I can do it at work. At home, it's like,
yeah.
So I will go to go tonight at bedtime.
They're not worried about being uncomfortable, though. That's the thing. So they'll out negotiate you because they lean into the discomfort very, very easily because they don't feel any.
And they know what they want very clearly.
Yeah, very clear on where the value is in it for them. Yeah.
Glin, thank you so much. And we will put a link in the show notes so that you can connect with Glin, her website, LinkedIn. We'll put a link to the book. So we'll put a link there so that there's plenty of resources and plenty of ways to reach out and connect to Glin as well. Thank you so much. You've been the most incredible guest.
Thank you. And I look forward to catching up with you again soon.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Glin. If you would like to find out a little bit more about Glin, all the links to her website and her book are in the show notes that you can grab there. Before you leave us, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that you never miss out on a podcast episode. Feel free to also check out our YouTube channel that we have just released and launched, where we are providing highly educational videos every single week to help you around sales, growth, and go-to-market.